Week 5 of the fantasy football season. His quarterback starts at every matchup Thursday night. San Francisco 49ers at the Rams. Brock Purdy, if he plays in this game, he's a start. He's banged up with the toe injury. Is Brock Purdy still? And I thought last week it wasn't a great outing for Purdy where he turned the football over a few times and obviously they lost in an upset game 26-21 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. But this week, Thursday night, division matchup, very familiar with the Los Angeles Rams. And Purdy, I think, could go out there and right the ship in this one, so I would start him. Mac Jones, if he starts for Purdy, even though he's not 100% with the toe injury, he would be a sit. Mac Jones filled in well for a couple games for Purdy, but he's not fantasy option week in and week out. Matthew Stafford to start. Anytime you got two-star receivers, Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, you're going to put points on the board. And Matthew Stafford, even at the latter part of his career, still going out there, still competing, still putting up numbers. And this week versus San Francisco, I like the matchup where their defense is banged up and really hasn't made stops. Minnesota Vikings, Cleveland Browns, second international game in a row for this Minnesota Viking team. Carson Wentz last week, a lot of garbage time, made a fantasy day for him. But this week in a matchup versus an underrated defense of the Cleveland Browns, led by Myles Garrett and obviously led by Denzel Ward in the secondary. I don't like Carson Wentz in this matchup. We know he's a gunslinger. We also know he takes a lot of big hits and had fumbling issues throughout his career. So this week, in another international game, he's a sit. Dylan Gabriel getting his first career start. And this is going to be a tough game for Dylan Gabriel to come in. Robert Flores' defense, where we saw a couple weeks ago, they went out there and destroyed that Cincinnati Bengals offense. So Dylan Gabriel, it was the right move, though, I thought, for the Cleveland Browns to go to him. They were going nowhere with Joe Flacco 1-4, and you might as well see what Gabriel has. And then if Gabriel can't get it going, let's say the next 4 or 5 games, it could be a possibility Shedeur Sanders steps in. But this week with a tough matchup, and Gabriel, obviously, in his first career start, he's just not someone I could trust. This week, Dallas Cowboys at the New York Jets. I think this could be a potential high-scoring game. And these are the type of games Dallas has been in all season long, where they're putting up points, and obviously the opponent is putting up points. So Dak Prescott leading the league in passing yards in the early going. The Cowboys offense is putting up a lot of points on the board, but still 1-2-1 to show for it. And even with CeeDee Lamb out last week, Dak put on a monster game with George Pickens. So this week of the Jet defense that can't stop anyone, he's a start. Justin Fields a start. I thought Fields looked good last week. He had a nice fantasy day, 28 fantasy points it was for Justin Fields. And this week versus the Dallas Cowboys and the Jets back home in this one, like I said, I think they're going to put points on the board. And this could be a game in the 30s or even mid-30s, I think, between these two teams. New York Giants at the New Orleans Saints. Jackson Dart to start. Last week, Dart looked good versus a good defense of the Los Angeles Chargers in his NFL debut. So this week on the fast track in New Orleans, it's a good matchup, so I would start him. The only downside, obviously, Malik Neighbors out for the season, tearing that ACL early in last week's ball game. And now Darius Slayton is going to step in and obviously take some of those targets and reps from Malik Neighbors. But like I said, this New Orleans Saints defense can't stop anyone. And with Dart's rushing upside, I think he's a quarterback that could crack the top 15-20 this week. Spencer Rattler sit. Rattler's definitely improved a little bit from last season and this year, and this offense has some playmakers on it. Obviously, Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Juwan Johnson. And even in a matchup, though, versus a mediocre Giant defense, I don't think Rattler is a guy you're going to trust, even in, let's say, Superflex 2 quarterback leagues, to go out there and be a viable option. Vegas Raiders at the Indianapolis Colts. Geno Smith a sit last week. He threw 3 interceptions in that one as Geno. And he's usually been a guy that's been protective of the football and accurate and not turning the football over. But this season with his new team, it's been the total opposite. Him and Brock Bowers haven't been on the same page, really. And him and Myers last week weren't on the same page. So this week at the Indianapolis Colts, where their defense has been better at home than it's been on the road the last couple seasons, he's a sit. Daniel Jones a start. Last week was the worst game of the year for Daniel Jones, but 6 points were taken away from him, where obviously Adonai Mitchell was gone up the sidelines, then reached the ball out, and he fumbled it to the back of the end zone, which was a touchback, but pretty much cost Daniel Jones 6 points, and obviously the Colts the game. So this week with a good matchup versus a bad Vegas Raiders defense, and Michael Pittman, Tyler Warren going out there and making plays for this offense, he's a start. Miami Dolphins at the Carolina Panthers, Tua start. We know Tyreek Hill out for the season with a bad knee injury on Monday night, but Tua still went out there, competed. He had a good game once Hill left versus the New York Jets. And this week it's a good matchup at the Panthers, where they're giving up over the last 2 weeks, 35 points per game is this Carolina team. So even with Hill out, I think Waddle will step up. He'll start making plays. Darren Waller emerged last week, found in the end zone twice. And we know Devon Achane, one of the better receiving backs out of the backfield. Bryce Young is it. Last season, he made some strides. Was Bryce Young after he got benched and came back in the last 4 games of the year. But this season, it's back to some of the old habits, holding on to the football, taking big hits, and turning the football over. And even in a good matchup this week versus the depleted secondary of the Dolphins, he's a sit. Denver Broncos at the Philadelphia Eagles. Bo Nix, a fringe option. Bo Nix had a big game last week versus Cincinnati Bengals. But this week, a great defense. He's versing defending champ 4-0 Philadelphia Eagles. He's a fringe option for me. Cortland Sutton, he's been a great number 1 wide receiver for this Denver Bronco team and good for the fantasy owners. But Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims, inconsistent young wide receivers that he needs a second guy to step up weekly in the passing game. And this week it's going to be tough versus secondary, obviously, of Mitchell and Cooper DeJong back there for Philadelphia. So Nix, at best, is a fringe option. And the other thing with Nix, a lot of throwing out of the pocket on the run, which could get him in trouble as well. Jalen Hurts is starting. I know people complaining, not a lot of passing yards, not a lot of pass attempts. But in terms of fantasy football, he's getting those touchdowns at the goal line, either with the tush push. Well, last week we saw 2 trick plays to Dallas Goedert on like forward passes or tosses to him. And this week, even though this is a good Bronco defense, Hurts is a starter each and every week. Houston Texans at the Baltimore Ravens. CJ Stroud is it. CJ Stroud just hasn't been the same now over the last season and change for this Texan team of fantasy owners. Last week, I know he had a pretty good game with Stroud, but pretty much this offense is Nico Collins in the receiving game. It's good to see Woody Marks emerge out of the backfield, but besides that, we haven't seen much, and even versus a banged-up Baltimore secondary and pass rush a little bit. He's a sit. Cooper Rush is it. Lamar Jackson out 2 to 3 weeks now with the hamstring injury. And Cooper Rush, he's not a scrub quarterback, I'll tell you that. Backing up for the Cowboys on and off over the last couple seasons. He's had some games, and he wasn't just a game manager. The Cowboys actually went out there and put up some offensive stats last season. But this week, with Lamar out and Cooper Rush in a new system where he was with Dallas many seasons, even though we had a whole training camp, I think I will pump the brakes on him. And we know this Houston Texan defense is a solid DST, and they shut out last week the Tennessee Titans. So Cooper Rush this week, I'll take a wait-and-see approach. He's a sit, but they obviously have the guys, Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, and Mark Andrews for production. Tennessee Titans, Arizona Cardinals, Cam Ward a sit. This offense can't move the ball. I think Cam Ward in the future will be a good quarterback and a fantasy option, but this season with limited weapons, Calvin Ridley, he's been a bust all year long. Alec Ayomaner, he's been okay at times, and Tony Pollard, there's just so much he could do. So like I said, not much going on in this offense and not a good offensive line. He's a sit. Kyler Murray a start. Kyler Murray's been solid so far in the early going for this Arizona Cardinal team. This week a good matchup versus the Titans. And Murray's been a better quarterback at home than he's been on the road throughout his career. And him and Marvin Harrison, it seems like at home they put up the numbers, where on the road they can't get anything going. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Seahawks, Baker Mayfield, he's locked in weekly as a start. It doesn't matter how many guys go down for this Tampa Bay Buc team. Baker Mayfield's a gamer. He's a clutch fourth quarter player as well and makes the plays when they need him. And this week, even in a hostile environment at the 12th man in Seattle, I give him the start. Sam Darnold, the fringe option. Darnold's definitely playing good football for the Seattle Seahawks team. We have to see a little bit more before he's a full start for me in fantasy football with Sam Darnold. But last season, no doubt, he went out there, had the monster year, but that was a loaded offense. Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison, Aaron Jones for the Minnesota Vikings. And this season, it's a good offense. Jackson Smith-Njigba, Cooper Kupp, Kenneth Walker, Charbonnet, A.J. Bonner. But obviously, we have to see a little bit more from Sam Darnold, because if he goes out there and has a bad game this week, he's going to be down once again of someone who's not going to be starting option for fantasy owners. Detroit Lions at the Cincinnati Bengals. Jared Goff, last couple weeks, numbers have been down a little bit for Goff, but this line offense is still putting up over 30 points per game in that time. So this week in a great matchup at Cincinnati, a defense that can't stop anyone. I know Goff's fantasy numbers have been way better at home than they've been on the road over the last few seasons, but I still will put Goff in the lineup. Jake Browning a sit. I thought Browning could come in and at least be a viable option in 2 quarterback super flex leagues, but he hasn't been doing anything. And you would think with guys like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins in this offense and a good receiving back in Chase Brown out of the backfield, he would go out there and be decent as Jake Browning, but that hasn't been obviously what's been going on, and it's a tough matchup versus a good defense in Detroit. Commanders at the Chargers. Jaden Daniels returning to this game after a 2-week absence, and it could have been long the way his ankle got landed on in that Week 2 ball game versus the Green Bay Packers. So this week, tough matchup on paper at the Los Angeles Chargers, but Jaden Daniels, he was the third, fourth quarterback off the board in many fantasy leagues, and he's a guy that finds ways to put points on the board regardless if Terry McLaurin's in the lineup or not. As well this week, Justin Herbert to start. They got great weapons in the receiving room. Quentin Johnston really emerging. Keenan Allen. McConkey's definitely had a down year so far in the early going. And then you got the impressive rookie back out of the backfield in Amari Hampton. So I know this offensive line now has lost 2 key pieces in the first 4 weeks of the season. But Herbert's still a player that's going to go out there. And like I said, with those type of guys in the receiving room to go out there and make plays. Sunday night, New England Patriots at the Buffalo Bills. Drake May, he's been a great quarterback for fantasy football this season. He's got some rushing upside. He spreads the football out to 7 or 8 different players. Week at Buffalo, he knows he's got to put points on the board if he wants to compete in this game. And Drake May, he's got poise in the pocket. He goes out there, makes the right throws, has a good IQ. And I would start him this week at Buffalo. Josh Allen to start, obviously locked in each and every week. He was the first, second quarterback off the board in fantasy leagues, and it doesn't matter the matchup. He's good for 30-plus per week pretty much is Allen. And the final game, Monday night, Kansas City Chiefs at the Jaguars. Patrick Mahomes to start. His numbers are getting back to a couple years ago. Obviously not at the crazy elite level they were, Patrick Mahomes, he's putting up on average over 20 fantasy points per game. So this week in a matchup at Jacksonville, where I don't think their defense is all that great, Mahomes got Xavier Worthy back last week, which was a huge boost to the offense. And now if they could get a little bit out of the running game, that play action really could work as well. So this week, he's an easy start, and Trevor Lawrence to sit there 3-1 Jacksonville on the season. Great start, but I don't think it's going to last. And Trevor Lawrence, he's not hitting Brian Thomas, and Travis Hunter's been a part-time player in the receiving room. So pretty much this offense is carried by Travis Etienne and Brenton Strange making some plays, and Cam Little being a solid field goal kicker. So that's quarterback starts at every matchup for Week 5 of the fantasy football season.